Hey everybody, it is Wednesday, May 24th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, I've been taping a couple interviews today that will be rolling out in the coming weeks. Some of you may know Carlos Whitaker, motivational speaker, author of a book called How to Human. Very inspirational, positive conversation. So look out for that on the premium account and then on the main feed after that. And then also spoke today with the editor-in-chief of Gallup, the polling company. Particularly interesting. I mean, we talked about domestic polling, but very cool. They poll in 140 countries. So he was talking about how culturally they have to change the way they ask questions, including how they are actually able to poll in places like Afghanistan, China, and Russia. So be on the lookout for that episode as well.
Okay, I am officially interested. I didn't know if I was going to be, but you got me, Moshe.
Jill, every time she hears I'm like talking about polling, she's like, wah, wah. And I was like, no, this will be interesting. I promise you.
The truth is that anything can be interesting, right?
That is part of our job here, is to try to tell you the most interesting stories happening out there. Because you can take interesting stories. I mean, some people have people like this in their lives and make them very boring. You can also take boring stories and make them interesting. So we appreciate all of you. We try to make every story interesting, or at least find the interesting tidbits for you every day.
Speaking of which, let's get to some of the headlines. A warning from the Surgeon General about social media and kids and what we could do about it. It appears Ron DeSantis will be officially declaring today on Twitter with Elon Musk. More on the man who believes that he is Trump's biggest threat to the GOP nomination. It comes as former President Trump got a trial date in that criminal case in New York related to hush money payments, and he isn't happy about it. White House threat: a teen is accused of deliberately crashing a U-Haul truck into a security barrier near the White House. Apple's investing billions of dollars in U.S. manufacturing as it looks to move more of its production line outside of China. A monster typhoon is barreling toward Guam with strong winds and a 25-foot storm surge. How safe are buildings in San Francisco in the case of a major earthquake? A new list is naming names when it comes to buildings at risk. And is LeBron James ready to retire? Plus, Moshe has on this day in history.
Jill, one of our favorites. Dawson's Creek made some history today, and it might surprise you.
All right, let's start with that new warning from the United States Surgeon General, although it probably won't come as a major surprise to many of you. Social media presents a, quote, profound risk of harm to the mental health and well-being of children and adolescents. Dr. Vivek Murthy issued that public advisory on Tuesday. In a 19-page report, he said that the effects of social media on adolescent mental health were not fully understood, but there are ample indicators that it is not good. Now, while there could be some benefits like connecting with others, there are also so many negatives, like being exposed to, quote, extreme, inappropriate, and harmful content that normalizes things like eating disorders and other destructive behavior. There's a lot of cyberbullying. It's impacting sleep. Kids aren't exercising or seeing their friends in person as much as they used to. Now, in an interview with the New York Times about his advisory, the Surgeon General said, quote, adolescents are not just smaller adults. They are in a different phase of development, and they are in a critical phase of brain development. Case in point, he says that frequent social media use could be associated with distinct changes in the developing brain when it comes to emotional learning and behavior, and also in the prefrontal cortex, which is really what's in charge of impulse control and emotional regulation, and also moderating social behavior. He says social media could also increase sensitivity to social rewards and punishments. Moshe, it reminds me of that old PSA from when we were kids, when the big concern was drug use. Remember the egg and the voice saying, this is your brain on drugs, and it showed the egg sizzling in the pan. I literally had this exact conversation with cognitive psychotherapist Nero Feliciano a few months ago for that special edition that we did of the Mo News podcast. And she said this exact thing. She said kids' brains are physically developing differently than ours did. And that is because of social media use.
Yeah, you were talking there that, I mean, multiple components of the brain here appear to be impacted by social media. You're talking about the amygdala, the emotional learning part, the behavioral part, the prefrontal cortex, impulse control. And the earlier that you expose kids to this, their brains are literally getting wired differently here. And it does come as we've seen this huge jump in depression, mental health issues among young people in the last decade. If some of you remember statistics class like I do, they used to say correlation is not causation. But in this case, there is clear connection here between social media and mental health. There's a 2019 study just a couple years ago that found that teens who spent more than 3 hours a day on social media faced double the risk of experiencing poor mental health outcomes, including symptoms of depression and anxiety. The numbers are startling here in terms of use. According to the report, 95% of teens reported using at least one social media platform, while more than a third said they use social media, quote, almost constantly. In addition, among the younger set, nearly 40% of children ages 8 to 12 use social media, even though the required minimum age for most sites is 13. As for what to do about it, the Surgeon General says more research is still needed here, but that until now, the burden of protecting youth has fallen predominantly on the kids themselves, the teens, and their families. He says that that's a lot to ask of parents. Take a technology that's rapidly evolving and fundamentally changes how kids perceive themselves and ask parents to have to manage it, which has been the case here. So what the Surgeon General is saying here in this report and is telling policymakers is that we've got to do what we did in other areas where we have product safety issues and place safety standards that parents can rely on that are actually enforced. So the social media companies have said they're creating their own rules here, their own limits in terms of how teens can access this stuff. But clearly, at least from the Surgeon General report, he says more is needed based on initial research, which means it'll fall on state and federal lawmakers to impose some sort of regulation on these companies.
But Moshe, case in point, as you said, nearly 40% of kids aged 8 to 12 use social media, even though most social media platforms say that the minimum age is 13.
Yeah, all of them.
Yeah, so clearly whatever they're doing is not working. But the question is then, in the meantime, at the very least, what can we do about it? There are some recommendations in the report. They say families should talk about it and create some type of social media plan. They recommend having tech-free times, like around bedtime or dinner time. Also, they say parents really need to model responsible social media behavior. So for the parents out there, it means put down your phone. And this is harder than it seems because we as adults in many ways are addicted to our phones as well. I actually had this exact conversation with my husband yesterday morning because I go on my phone a lot for work. I post news, I listen to our podcast, I cut clips for social media. And he looked at me, it was during breakfast, and he said, Jill, every single time that our daughter has seen you today, you have had your head in the phone. What? And he said, what kind of message is that sending her? And he wasn't like berating me. He was asking me as a real question. And I looked at him and I said, you're totally right. And then I put down my phone, but it definitely is a challenge.
Right. You're modeling behavior for the kids, right? I mean, it's something that has already come up. I mean, we're still a few months away, God willing, from our first now. And we've had the discussion because, I live on Instagram. And so how will I conduct myself? And it's a discussion that we've had. And clearly we're coming to a point now where Facebook launches in 2004, but like on laptop among college kids. Social media really takes a hyper focus in the smartphone age over the last 10 years or so. And so we've learned a lot in these 10 years. You have the Surgeon General's advisory, which we will link to in the show notes so you can read the full thing for yourselves, everybody. And we're getting to the point now where we've learned some lessons now and we've seen the impact of this. And so now how do we adjust? How do schools adjust? How do parents adjust? How do these companies adjust? And is there a role for government here in terms of regulation? Warning labels, it sort of reminds me of, cigarette packs or alcohol or whatever. What is the warning label that will come with social media as we start to learn the real impact here, especially among younger people? As
a parent, I think so much of it is going to be finding other parents who maybe agree to not necessarily give their kids smartphones anyway at a young age. And if there's enough
the return
kids
of the
who
flip
won't
phone,
do
huh?
it, the other challenge that you're going to start to notice when you and Alex have your baby is that you want your phone because you're going to always want to take pictures of them. So it's hard because you're like, wait, that's so cute. I mean, I used to have hundreds of pictures, especially of my daughter when she was first born. Anyway, I do want to do another plug, though, for the special podcast that I did with Nero Feliciano, because we talked all about this stuff. And she had some really, really solid ideas if you're a parent out there who is struggling with this. Okay, now on to politics. We have an official announcement about his official announcement. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis will announce that he is running for president during a discussion with Twitter CEO Elon Musk tonight at 6 p.m. Eastern. They're going to be hosting an event on Twitter Spaces, which is that platform for audio chats. It will be moderated by David Sachs, who is a tech entrepreneur and also a DeSantis supporter. Later tonight, the DeSantis campaign will be releasing a launch video, and DeSantis will be getting on the campaign trail pretty much right away. He's going to be heading to some early voting states shortly after Memorial Day. Moshe, this was pretty surprising, I think. What do you make of it? Are we looking at Elon Musk kingmaker in the Republican Party at this point?
It's so interesting. I mean, Elon has, unlike other previous tech owners and entrepreneurs who've tried to keep their platform agnostic, if you will, Elon has made his opinions clear. He has tweeted openly that Trump shouldn't be reelected. He's also been very critical of Biden. Here, we're going to see how things unfold later this evening, whether he endorses DeSantis, but this is sort of a tacit endorsement by serving as the platform here. And Elon has tried to keep the water warm for more conservatives as he took over Twitter last fall. So a couple things here. Elon is also a businessman. He's trying to keep Twitter relevant. And the campaign cycle, typically the last couple cycles, Twitter is the place to go for campaign news. And he wants to ensure that that continues to be the case in 2024. Remember, he let Trump back on Twitter last fall. So Trump has an account, but Trump has not used it. Of course, he launched his own Truth Social and been critical of Trump. So clearly some animosity building up there. So, he's going out of his way here to give a platform for Trump's biggest opponent. So that's going to be very interesting to watch. A DeSantis aide, by the way, tells NBC that they've been watching Twitter become this increasingly friendly space for conservatives under Musk's leadership. And so they believe that this allows them to bypass traditional media and speak directly to the conservative audience, which is one of their goals here. Trump, of course, is already responding his campaign, saying that announcing on Twitter is perfect for Ron DeSantis. This is the Trump campaign statement. This way, he doesn't have to interact with people, and the media can't ask him any questions. The knock on DeSantis has been that he doesn't like small talk, that he's very awkward. So we're going to find out more about that as he begins to campaign here. But that's clearly a storyline that the Trump campaign would like to get out there. So you have DeSantis reaching out to conservatives. You have Twitter serving as this platform. Elon trying to keep it relevant. Elon potentially trying to be kingmaker here, saying that Twitter is the place to find your political news and figure out who's going to win. Back to the politics of all of this, DeSantis is the biggest threat right now, or at least he'll tell you that, to Donald Trump. Right now, when you look at the polls, Trump has about 50% in the GOP primary. About half of all Republican primary voters say they would vote for Trump. Just over 20% DeSantis, and then the rest of the candidates are in the single digits. Sort of reminds me, when I looked at those numbers, by the way, it reminded me of 2007, obviously different context here, but Hillary Clinton was in the 40 to 50% range. A guy named Barack Obama was in the 20% range. This is now 16 years ago. Obviously different context, but it does show you that movement can happen. And so we will see. A lot of people are very open-minded when I talk to Republicans. A number of Republicans, even those who voted for Trump, are just like, I'm ready for something new. Whether DeSantis is able to make good on his pledge that he's the only guy who can beat Trump, he's the only guy who can beat Biden, we will have to see. But one thing we do know is key to winning is money, and he does have a lot of big fundraisers lined up and donors lined up. And so that'll allow him to remain competitive here with Trump.
And a lot of analysts have pointed out that it is a long campaign season. And even Barack Obama, who, of course, eventually won the presidency twice, had some stumbles in the beginning. And so
they all have stumbles.
All of these
they
are
all have
not
stumbles.
Right. So whatever winds up happening here is not necessarily make or break in these first few weeks.
A lot of it is messaging. Do you have the right message for the right time? George W. Bush did in 2000. Bill Clinton did in 92. Obama had the right message, the right feel for 2008, especially with the financial collapse. Trump clearly had a message that resonated with people in 2016. Biden, anyway. So a lot of it is messaging. A lot of it will be, we're going to see ups and downs. You're going to see Trump collapse, DeSantis collapse. I mean, this is a long roller coaster of a campaign, unfortunately for all of you. We will have much more, by the way, breaking down DeSantis's bio, what he's done legislatively, etc., in tomorrow's podcast and the newsletter.
Okay, time now for the speed read from the Associated Press. Police have arrested a Missouri man, a 19-year-old that they believe intentionally crashed a U-Haul truck into a security barrier at a park across from the White House. He was identified as 19-year-old Sai Varsith Kandula of Chesterfield, a St. Louis suburb. He smashed into the barrier near the north side of Lafayette Square at around 10 p.m. on Monday. Nobody was injured in the crash. Afterward, he exited the truck with a Nazi flag and started to shout as park police and Secret Service officers approached him. He was questioned by investigators and said that he was there to take over the government and wanted to kill President Biden. A witness said the driver smashed into the barrier at least twice. He said, when the van backed up and rammed it again, I decided I wanted to get out of there. I don't blame him.
The video's a little freaky. I posted it on Instagram. For those of you who are familiar with the area around the White House, this is the north side of the White House next to the Hay Adams Hotel. So still, you have to go through the entire park, Lafayette Square, in order to then get to the street that then has the fence to the White House. So still far off here, but still a scary situation that played out. It led to an evacuation of the hotel across the street. Officers from the Secret Service and Metro PD there in D.C. searched the truck after the crash. As you noted, they found that Nazi flag. No weaponry, though. That said, the park police is still charging him on multiple counts, including threatening to kill, kidnap, or inflict harm on the president, vice president, or members of their family, assault with a dangerous weapon, that's the truck here, reckless driving, destruction of federal property, and trespassing. Now, the Secret Service does monitor hundreds of people who make threats to the president. It's not clear at this point whether Kandula was on their radar or if he had threatened the president before. You often hear these cases. They'll send letters in advance and then show up. There's a couple of these cases a year, actually, of cars getting close or people driving across the country with ambitions to do harm to our leaders. And so it does mean that the Secret Service has its hands full on most days.
From CNN, Super Typhoon Mawar is barreling toward Guam, threatening to slam into the United States territory as the strongest storm there in more than 60 years. The typhoon is posing a triple threat of devastation, including deadly winds equivalent to a Category 5 hurricane, exceptional storm surge, and torrential rainfall. This is according to the National Weather Service office in Guam. The storm is being described as, quote, one that will be remembered for decades.
Jill, I actually got a message about this from a military family. We have a lot of military personnel out there in Guam. It's this island out in the Pacific. It's about a 4-hour flight from there to the Philippines. It's really out there in the middle of the Pacific. This typhoon, despite how small Guam is expected to make landfall today. If the typhoon does make direct landfall, the island will be facing some of the storm's strongest winds and a high storm surge. And though Guam is located out there in the West Pacific Ocean, an area that does see a lot of tropical cyclones, a direct hit is very rare. The island is just 30 miles long, so it's been lucky many go-arounds. And apparently it's only been hit by a cyclone just about 8 times in the last 75 years. So because of how rare it is and how large this typhoon is, there is a lot of concern about the potential damage it could do.
From the AP, we now have a trial date for former President Trump's criminal case related to hush money payments. It is March 25th of next year. Trump threw up his hands in frustration Tuesday as a judge scheduled his criminal trial for next March, putting the former president and current candidate in a Manhattan courtroom in the heat of next year's presidential primary season. Trump appeared by video conference at that pretrial hearing in the hush money case. Trump was less than thrilled when the judge advised him to cancel all other obligations for the duration of the trial, which could last several weeks. Trump pleaded not guilty last month to 34 felony counts of falsifying business records related to those hush money payments made during the 2016 campaign to bury allegations that he had extramarital sexual encounters with Stormy Daniels. Trump has denied all wrongdoing.
So Trump said little during the hearing via video conference, but then said his piece on social media afterwards, writing, quote, "Just had New York County Supreme Court hearing where I believe my First Amendment rights, freedom of speech have been violated, and they forced upon us a trial date of March 25th, right in the middle of primary season. Very unfair. This is exactly what radical left Democrats wanted. It's called election interference, all caps. And nothing like this has ever happened in our country before. 3 exclamation points. The judge said that he did arrive at that trial date of March 25th after discussion with both Trump's attorneys and the prosecutors. The Trump attorneys were trying to get it later next year. The prosecutors are trying to get it earlier next year. They agreed to it. A Trump attorney quoted afterwards said Trump knew the date prior to the hearing and said she didn't see the reaction that the rest of us saw on the video conference. Now, there are going to be some preliminary dates beforehand. One thing the Trump attorneys are trying to do, sort of a long shot bid, is to move this from state court to federal court because some of the alleged conduct took place while he was president, and they feel they can't get a fair trial in a New York state court.
From the Wall Street Journal, Apple strikes multi-billion-dollar supply deal with Broadcom. The multi-year agreement with the chipmaker includes U.S.-made components at a time that the iPhone maker has been trying to bring more of that type of work in-house. Apple has long sought to replace chips made by other companies with versions that it designs. As part of the deal that Apple and Broadcom disclosed on Tuesday, the chipmaker will supply Apple with 5G radio frequency components and wireless connectivity components. The companies did not disclose the exact value of the deal. The components will be built in several manufacturing hubs around the United States, including in Fort Collins, Colorado.
So we covered the trip recently by Tim Cook, the head of Apple, to India. Apple has been trying to get more of its supply chain out of China in recent years, for a variety of reasons, including how the government conducts itself there, including COVID, including, anticipating if there's a potential war at some point between China and Taiwan. Apple wants to be able to keep its supply chain going without depending too much on the country. So they've been trying to ramp up production in places like Vietnam and India in recent years. And they've also been looking at doing some more manufacturing here at home. And this has also been a big push for the White House. They have some agreement here from Republicans. They're trying to bring more chip making here to the U.S. Only about 12% of the world's computer chips are produced in the U.S., although the government now has put new incentives in a $53 billion bill last year to alter that landscape slowly but surely.
Now to an exclusive story from NBC News. Famous historic sites, low-income apartments, and Twitter's headquarters all appear on a previously unpublished draft list of more than 3,000 concrete buildings in San Francisco that could be at high risk of collapse in a major earthquake. This is according to a copy of a city government document obtained by NBC News through a public records request. The building list provides a window into the sweeping cross-section of San Francisco that could be especially vulnerable in a high-magnitude earthquake. NBC News made the decision to publish this list for the first time. The city official tasked with overseeing the production of the list expressed concern that publishing it could prematurely cause uneasiness among tenants, investors, and others.
You think?
Before building owners have a chance to do thorough evaluations.
So the list excludes single-family homes, public schools, and buildings constructed after 2000. It's not clear when the list will be finalized, but the structures on the current list have one thing in common. They were built with concrete at a time before engineers fully understood how much steel or other reinforcement was needed to keep the concrete from crumbling while shaking. We'll include a link to the NBC story here. You can literally go, address by address, 1 Market Street, 1455 Market Street, 100 Drum Street, et cetera, to see if a building you know of or you're familiar with is on the list. Thousands of people who live and work in the buildings could be taking additional risk every time they step inside. Of course, retrofitting the buildings so that they're deemed safe could require billions of dollars and decades of work Jill, my first thought when I saw this story was like, San Francisco, they have a lot going on right now. Do they actually need this as well?
It's a great point, but they haven't had a massive earthquake in so many years. So it's not necessarily top of mind.
Right.
But if the big one were to hit, it would be good to know which buildings were safe.
Yeah, there's a lot of concern across the Pacific Northwest. There's also a fault line in Seattle. I worked on a story on that a couple of years ago, Puget Sound, and concern about a potential earthquake there that could be a repeat of something they saw centuries ago. And so always a concern in the Bay Area, given all the fault lines there.
From ESPN, LeBron James says that he'll consider retirement this offseason after scoring 40 points and playing all but 4 seconds of the LA Lakers Game 4 loss to the Denver Nuggets. James ended his post-game news conference by telling reporters, "Going forward with the game of basketball, I've got a lot to think about." After the press conference, ESPN asked him to elaborate. He said he needs to think about if he wants to continue to play next year. James is 38 years old. He just led the number 7 seeded Lakers all the way to the Western Conference Finals, though they were swept by Denver in 4 games. He played in all 17 of LA's postseason games, even though he was still dealing with this right foot injury that did cause him to miss a month late in the regular season. He had a torn tendon. It is possible that he'll need surgery this summer, but still somewhat surprising news.
At the same time, when asked by ESPN if he believed a full summer of rehab could get him back to being the player he was before the foot injury, James nodded and said, "Because I'm still better than 90% of the NBA, maybe 95%. So clearly thinks he still has it. Over the past several years, including this year, he has said repeatedly that he wants to stay around until his son gets in the league. That's his oldest son, Bronny, who recently said he'd be playing college basketball for USC next season. LeBron said, "I've done what I've had to do in this league, and my son is going to take his journey. Whatever his journey is, he's going to do what's best for him." Jill, earlier this year, we covered how he beat Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's all-time scoring record. And beyond that, he was asked, well, what's left for you to do at this point? You've won championships. You've gotten the all-time scoring record. And he said, "I want to play with my son." So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, especially after he was able to take the Lakers further than many people thought they would be going this year. And then, of course, until they were swept in the Western Conference Finals. It feels like a Tom Brady situation when it comes to LeBron. You know,
I was thinking the same
multiple
thing.
championships, both this, like, what are you playing for at this point? You still want to go out strong. You know, Brady came back, did clearly not the comeback or final season that he was anticipating. So I think, you know, that's got to be going through LeBron's mind at this point. All right, now time for On This Day in History on this May 24th. As we talk nostalgia on this podcast, one thing many of us look back fondly on is the cereals we ate from back in the day. Magic Spoon cereal has joined us as a partner and has replicated some of the flavors you remember from yesteryear in a more wholesome way. They have a special deal right now for the Mo News community. You can head over to magicspoon.com/Mo News to grab a variety pack today. They make a version of these flavors in a gluten-free, high-protein way. I'll tell you more about that at the end of On This Day, but let's get started here. On this day in 1883, the Brooklyn Bridge opened, Jill, just about a half mile from me in Brooklyn. It connected Brooklyn and Manhattan in New York City, considered a brilliant feat of 19th century engineering. And Jill, what some people may not know, it was a woman, Emily Warren Roebling, who handled the completion of the bridge. Her father-in-law was the designer and builder. He started the job back in 1869, 14 years previous to that. But then a ferry injured his leg. He died 3 weeks later from a tetanus infection. The job then went to his eldest son, Washington, who 3 years later contracted a sickness caused by the bridge's underwater foundation. Emily was Washington's wife, and then she would go on to manage the completion of the project as it opened on this day in 1883.
Very cool. Do you want the job at that point when the first 2 people suffered very, very serious and in one case fatal injuries while working on it?
Yeah, it seems like if your father-in-law goes down, your husband goes down, but good for her. She took it through.
And it's still spectacular. Running across it, walking across it, driving across it, seeing it.
It's iconic. And then you have some more modern bridges that connect Manhattan. Manhattan, by the way, is an island, about 2 million people on it. And you're either connected through tunnels or bridges to get off Manhattan. Nothing really compares to the Brooklyn Bridge. And now to a couple on this days, more recent on this days. It was just 3 years ago, 2020 on this day, when George Floyd was killed during an arrest in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It set off massive protests around the country, generating greater support for the Black Lives Matter movement. Police officer Derek Chauvin was later convicted of his murder. And just last year, it was just a year ago today, when we had the tragedy at Uvalde, the school shooting, 19 children, 2 adults killed at Robb Elementary School, the deadliest shooting in Texas history. All right, now to a big birthday we're celebrating today. Bob Dylan, born on this day in 1941. He turns 82 today, Jill.
I still listen to Bob Dylan all the time, especially when I'm driving.
So when is Bob Dylan time versus Bruce Springsteen time for you? Like, what's the mood?
There's a couple of Bob Dylan songs that just have gotten me through some moments in my life. Mm-hmm. And so usually there's a few roads that I like, that when I drive on them, I like Bob Dylan.
Jill, it's remarkable. He's 82 now. He released his full first album when he was just 21 years old. And next year, The Times They Are A-Changin' turns 60 years old.
Wow.
All right, 2 other pop culture items here on this day 23 years ago. May 24th, 2000, Dawson's Creek aired the first ever primetime romantic kiss between 2 men.
I did not realize that was on Dawson's Creek.
And that we had to wait until this century to see that. That did not happen in the 90s, because a lot is made of the Ellen coming out episode just a few years previous. But then it took a couple more years before we were able to see a kiss between 2 men in prime time. And Jill, I know we talk a lot about 80s and 90s music, but I want to throw back to this song. We'll end, speaking of music. Jill, on this day in 1969, that is Sugar Sugar by the Archies. It was released. It was actually launched on a cartoon show, an animated show. It would become the #1 song on the pop charts in 1969.
Also a great song that I'm surprised hasn't been remixed yet. Unless it has, then I just don't know it.
Definitely waiting for a moment for like Miley Cyrus or
exactly.
Lizzo or Lady Gaga to like do their version of it. And Jill, one thing that surprised me is the song came out in 1969. It has the feel of more of a 50s, early 60s song. It was coming out, despite those tumultuous times of Vietnam and the rock era, etc., in 69. But, so it feels like a little throwback, at least a few years.
All right. A big thank you to everybody for listening to the Mo News podcast. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store so we can continue to grow.
And don't forget to join Mo News Premium, mo.news/premium, to support what we're doing here at Mo News and get access to our members-only podcast, where you'll get early access to all of our episodes, as well as some exclusive content, a members-only Instagram feed with extra content. And for all of you who have your questions about the news, we answered one of them yesterday. Dial us on the Mo News news line. We need to come up with a name for this, Jill. The news line, the direct line, the question line. We'll come up with it. We'll brand it. Needless to say, it's 1-800-711-MOSH, M-O-S-H, to ask your question. Say hi and let us know what you're thinking about when it comes to the news.
I think the hotline, Mosh. I like
the hotline.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm
Call
into
the
it.
Mo News hotline,
Yes.
1-800-711-MOSH, M-O-S-H. Call the hotline. It sounds urgent. I like it. Call the hotline. Let us know the question that is top of mind, and we'll try to answer it on a future podcast.
And again, still working on 1-800-711-JILL for Seinfeld references, Bruce Springsteen songs. We could talk
and Bob Dylan. It
yes,
sounds like Bob
exactly.
Dylan. Yeah. Today it's blown in the wind over on the Jill line.
All right, guys. See you tomorrow.